I pulled into my driveway that Saturday, expecting nothing more than a quiet afternoon by the lake, maybe a cold beer in hand and a fishing line in the water. But instead, I was greeted by something that made my stomach drop. A 6-foot-tall, chain-link fence stretched across the trail that led directly from my backyard to the lake. I slammed the truck door shut and stormed toward it, boots crunching over the gravel, my pulse climbing with every step. The trail had always been open. Always. For 3 years I'd used it without issue. It was one of the reasons I bought the house. But now, like a slap in the face, it was sealed off with a shiny silver padlock and a smug little sign bolted to the fence that read, "Private access. HOA members only. Trespassers will be prosecuted." At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe the county had installed it for some kind of maintenance or erosion project. But then I saw the name in small print at the bottom of the sign. Green Lake Shores Homeowners Association. That's when the heat rushed up the back of my neck. They did this without so much as a letter or a knock on the door. I wasn't just an HOA member, I was a homeowner who'd been here longer than half the board. I didn't even go inside. I marched straight to the HOA office on Maplewood Drive, barely noticing the speed bumps or stop signs in the neighborhood. The office was quiet except for the hum of a desktop printer in the back. Behind the counter sat Karen Whitmore, the newly elected HOA president, who looked up at me like she'd been expecting this moment all day. "I need to talk to someone about the fence that went up behind my property," I said, voice tight but controlled. Her lips curled into a smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you mean the Lake Access Control Project? That was approved last month at the community meeting." "Funny, I don't remember getting an invite." "It was on the newsletter," she said, tapping a stack of papers beside her. "You really should check your emails." I took a slow breath. That trail has been open since I moved in. Now, it's behind a locked fence and somehow I'm not considered a member? She flipped through a binder like she already knew what she'd find. "The path runs across parcel 17B. It's HOA-controlled property now. Voted unanimously to restrict. Access to dues-paying members only. It's about keeping the area clean, safe, and, well, free of outsiders." I stared at her, realizing what this really was. Payback. Ever since I refused to repaint my house from forest green to their mandated oyster gray, Karen had been on some kind of personal crusade. This fence wasn't about security, it was about control. And maybe she thought I'd just roll over and accept it. But she had no idea who she was messing with. For the next several days, I barely slept. Not because of the fence itself, but because something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. Karen was smug, sure, but too smug. Like she knew I wouldn't question it. And the way she so casually tossed around the phrase HOA-controlled property set off every alarm in my head. I've dealt with enough bureaucratic nonsense in my life to know that when someone's being vague, they're hiding something. So I started digging. Pulled out my original property documents, settlement paperwork, and the plat maps that came with my home when I bought it. I remembered the realtor mentioning the lake trail being adjacent to undeveloped land, but I hadn't paid much attention at the time. I figured the HOA owned that strip, or at least managed it. But as I pored over the diagrams and fine print, I noticed something strange. The trail was labeled as Parcel 17B, and in every document I had, 17B was not listed under HOA ownership. In fact, it wasn't listed under any community title at all. That got me thinking. If the HOA didn't own it, who did? I headed to the county recorder's office the next morning, sipping burnt gas station coffee as I combed through digital files and dusty old folders. I asked the clerk to pull up all recent activity on Parcel 17B. She squinted at her screen, clicked a few times, and then raised an eyebrow. Huh, she muttered. Looks like the HOA had a 5-year lease on that land. Started back in. Yeah, 5 years ago last month. Lease? I asked, leaning in. She nodded. From a private owner. Lease expired 2 weeks ago. No record of renewal. That was it. That was the crack in the armor. The HOA never owned the land. They rented it. And when their lease ended, they must have either forgotten or just assumed no one would notice. But they went ahead and built a fence on land that no longer belonged to them. I checked with zoning, and sure enough, Parcel 17B had quietly gone back on the market. No big listing, no open house, just a dry little entry on a local real estate website under miscellaneous land parcels. Price, $8,000. No structures, no utilities, no offers. To most people, it was worthless. Just a 15-foot wide, 300-foot long stretch of overgrown dirt leading to a patch of lake. But to me, it was everything. It was my view, my routine, my sanity, and now, my ultimate checkmate. Without hesitation, I called the listed agent. "Is Parcel 17B still available?" I asked. "Sure is," she said cheerfully. "You want to take a look?" "I don't need to," I replied. "I've seen it every morning for 3 years. I'll take it." As I signed the purchase agreement and wired the funds, I couldn't help but grin. Karen had fenced me out of what she thought was hers. Now I owned the one piece of land she couldn't touch, and she didn't even know it yet. The morning after the land officially became mine, I woke up early, same as always, and made my way out back, coffee in hand, boots on. I stood at the edge of my lawn, staring at the shiny padlock on the gate like it was daring me to try something. I took a long sip, then turned on my heel and walked back inside. This wasn't going to be some dramatic late-night operation with balaclavas and bolt cutters. No. This needed to be loud, public, undeniable. At 10 a.m. sharp, a locksmith's van pulled into my driveway. I gave him the parcel number and showed him the land deed. He raised an eyebrow. "So, you're saying this fence is on your property now?" I nodded. "That's right. They built it after their lease expired. They've been locking me out of my own land. I'm just making it right." The guy let out a low whistle and got to work. 10 minutes later, the old lock was on the ground, and a brand-new commercial-grade keypad lock clicked into place. I programmed a new code, one no one else knew, and installed my own sign just above the keypad. Private property. Access by owner's permission only. Trespassers will be prosecuted. It had a nice ring to it. By noon, the neighborhood had taken notice. You don't mess with an HOA president's illusion of control and not cause a stir. Karen showed up first, strutting down the sidewalk with that too-wide smile and her HOA clipboard like she was the sheriff of some suburban ghost town. 2 board members followed behind her like backup dancers, whispering and pretending not to gawk at the new sign. She stopped at the gate and tried the keypad. Nothing. She tried again, hitting random numbers a little harder like the gate would. Change its mind if she showed enough authority. "I'm sorry," I called out, strolling up behind them, "but that gate's on private property now. You'll need the owner's permission to get in." Karen spun around. "You can't do this. That trail is for HOA members only. We have bylaws." "And I have a deed," I said, pulling out a copy from the folder I'd brought just for this occasion. Parcel 17B, formerly leased by the HOA, now owned outright by me. Her jaw tightened. She grabbed the paper like she thought she could burn holes in it with her eyes. One of the board members tried to whisper something in her ear, but she waved him off. "You're interfering with community access," she said, voice rising. "This will go to the board. We'll bring legal action." I smiled. "You do that. But while you're drafting your lawsuit, you might want to look into who authorized building that fence after the lease expired. Because as of right now, I could sue you for trespassing. And I just might." Karen stood frozen, her power slipping, like sand through her fingers, and that's when I knew. I didn't just own a strip of land. I owned the key to everything she thought she controlled. The cease and desist letter showed up 3 days later, delivered in a manila envelope by a kid on a scooter wearing a Green Lake Shores HOA shirt. The irony almost made me laugh. Karen couldn't even be bothered to send it certified. Just some poor intern doing weekend rounds like this was a neighborhood newspaper route. I opened it on the porch, sipping sweet tea while the lake glistened just beyond the now-locked gate, and read it with mild amusement. The letter was exactly what I expected, full of pompous legal jargon and empty threats. They accused me of obstructing community access, violating HOA easement rights, and damaging community cohesion. That last one nearly made me spit out my tea. If anything, Karen had been swinging a sledgehammer at community cohesion since the day she took over the board. Still, I wasn't about to play defense. I took the letter straight to my lawyer, Marlene, a no-nonsense woman who'd seen her fair share of HOA power trips crash and burn. She skimmed the letter in about 30 seconds and let out a dry chuckle. "This is garbage," she said. "They never renewed the lease. You bought the property fair and square. If they built a fence on it afterward, they're the ones trespassing. We filed a counterclaim the same week: property damage, unlawful occupation, and attempted seizure of private land. It wasn't just a defense. It was a shot right back at them. The court date was set fast, and word of the lawsuit spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. At the hearing, Karen arrived, with her lawyer, an overly polished man with gelled hair and a smug smile that matched hers. He walked in like he already won. Karen sat beside him with her arms crossed, glaring daggers across the courtroom like this was personal. And it was. But she was about to find out just how deep I'd dug. I handed the judge the expired lease agreement, the original property deed, and the transfer documents proving my legal ownership of Parcel 17B. Then came the real nail in the coffin: time-stamped security footage from my backyard camera. It showed the HOA workers installing the fence on my property after the lease had ended, complete with Karen standing by giving orders like a general on a battlefield. The judge's face tightened with every page and every frame of video. By the time Karen's lawyer started to speak, the judge cut him off with a raised hand. The HOA had no legal right to erect a barrier on private property they do not own, he said, voice firm. Furthermore, the defendant, he pointed at me, acted within his rights to change the locks and restrict access. Any further attempts to interfere will be considered harassment. Karen's face went pale. Her lawyer slumped like someone had pulled the bones out of his spine. But I wasn't done. Because buried in the evidence I handed over was one more little detail. A receipt, dated and signed, showing Karen used HOA funds to buy the lock, fence, posts, and signage. No board vote, no member approval, just her signature. The judge took one look at it and said, "We'll be discussing that in a separate hearing." And that's when I knew the tables weren't just turning. They were flipping, over completely. It took less than a month for the fallout to hit full force. Word spread through Green Lake shores like gasoline catching fire. Suddenly, neighbors who used to avoid eye contact were knocking on my door, curious, concerned, and some downright thrilled. Turns out a lot of people didn't like Karen, but most were too afraid to say anything. Not anymore. The HOA was ordered to pay damages, legal fees, and most importantly, take down the entire fence at their own cost. I watched from my back porch with a cold drink in hand as a crew came in with power tools and pulled it apart piece by piece. The look on Karen's face, when she passed by pretending not to see me, was the sweetest reward of all. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. With the land in my name and the legal battle behind me, I decided to do something that would make this personal victory even more satisfying. I transformed Parcel 17B into a mini business. I poured a bit of money into cleanup, cleared the brush, laid gravel, built a few benches overlooking the water, even added a kayak rack. Then, I had a sign professionally made and planted it right where the old HOA sign used to be. Lakeside Access. Private property, fishing passes, 15-day. Kayak launch. $10. By appointment only, I put up a small website and a QR code for mobile payments. And just like that, the same gate that had once locked me out became a cash-generating reminder that I now owned the only legitimate lake access point in the neighborhood. The kicker? HOA members started showing up, one by one. I saw the same. People who voted for exclusive member access standing in line to pay me for the privilege. Some of them grumbled, but most just nodded, quietly complicit in Karen's downfall. I was polite, smiling, businesslike, but I kept records, every pass, every transaction. Then came the final blow. Karen was removed from the board in a quiet emergency vote that was anything but subtle. Turns out my little lawsuit had uncovered more than they were ready for. The funds she used for the fence, they weren't just unauthorized, they were siphoned from the community maintenance budget. That meant potholes went unfixed, park benches stayed broken, and the HOA reserve fund was dangerously low. Residents weren't just angry, they were livid. A new interim president took over, someone quieter, humbler, and very interested in settling disputes, not starting them. Karen? She disappeared from neighborhood meetings entirely, her once daily HOA patrols suddenly non-existent. But the best part came one afternoon, weeks later. I was out near the lake tending to the benches when I noticed someone standing at the gate. Karen. She didn't say a word, just stared at the new sign. "Looking to fish?" I asked, not bothering to hide the grin. She didn't answer, just turned and walked away. And me? I went back to work, whistling, knowing I held the only key that ever really mattered.